So to tell to tell the truth, I don't really use here any functional thing in Scala, except that we have not lambdas here and stuff like pattern matching, but I think it's already available in Java to some extent, and lambdas we have in Java. So this example is not really functional programming way, not really pure functional way, I believe, but still I think it's okay to implement the factory method in this way. So yeah, just to make sure that we are on the same page, so I described this pattern, basically not described, but read through this public available information in this site, Refactoring Guru, about this beautiful pattern that is not really used. So basically in production, I didn't really saw anything like that implemented. So basically I'm a Java developer, Spring. Basically I primarily work with frameworks like Spring and other legacy frameworks, but yeah, I never ever saw this implementation of this abstract factory pattern. It doesn't mean that I didn't use factory method pattern, I think, but the implementation itself I didn't really saw. How can I apply this, and never saw others did that. Maybe in some kind of library they did that, but never saw in the production code. But nevertheless, I just copied this code and just pasted over to ChatGPT, and that's basically it. It gave me code, right? So it gave me code, translated code from this pseudocode to Scala code, and I just copy pasted here, and here we have such a beautiful code. So we are in the main Scala method. We have main method, which is just we creating a new object application and assigning to this variable, and then calling application start. So this class application is here. This is just self-written class which uses dialog, which is not initialized property. So we have here this property uninitialized when the object is created, but then when we call actually this initialize method, this object gets initialized. Next we have private def read application config file. It just here we can actually read from some kind of file, or yeah, so basic configuration file going to network, or just in this project or in a file, or maybe we have file in the some kind of cloud storage. But here it's just things simplified, so we just create in this config object. So without simplification, it would be some network call or some other stuff as I described, and then just returning this config object populated with the values from file. So but here, yeah, simplified, we just returning a config. Next we have, yeah, as I said, initialize. What it does is just creates a config. It calls this method read application config file, which is basically that. It returns config windows, and config variable gets assigned, or constant get assigned with this config window. So we just can do like that. All right. And then if config os match window, so in this config we have property os, which is can be Windows or web. It can be actually called like that, Windows or web. So we can actually do like enum, not strings, but type OS, then assign to that, like that, and maybe like that, Windows or web, like that. In Scala we can declare such beautiful types, union types. I think it's called union types maybe. So sum type. Alright, so we declare this config as OS or this one, and then when we call in this config, we pass in, like, we can pass Windows here and then config OS match, like that. So, and this never ever happened because we have only two options. So yeah, I'm a beginner to Scala. Maybe we can simplify here things a little bit, but nevertheless we can actually, we can provide like that. We can say that application class would accept this config class, type, which is case class. So, and in this case, when we have config, we can just say that from dialog we saying that we just can do like that. So we can do not initialized, but we instead just pass in here. We would need to create, when we create in this application application object, we must pass config here, but I don't understand why missing argument for parameter config. Fuck this shit. I passed config. Maybe like that? No. Alright, so we pass in a config, and then just from config we do config match, and then if it's Windows we just do it like that, and if we have web we just do it in another thing. But fuck it, shit, motherfucker, it doesn't really compile. I'm new to Scala, so, and then we have initialize, which is not needed, and start, just render, right? Dialog render, alright. So this can be changed to val. Of course it can be changed to val. So we have class So we have class application.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, you don't know. Class application config private val dialog config OS match Windows and web. If we have this OS string or type Windows, then we create Windows dialog. If we have web, then we create web dialog, and then we have start a method which belongs to this application class. Maybe we can of course do something like another way, but here it is, here how I coded this stuff. Then, so this is like application class, we pass in config, and based on config OS here, so we pass in this config object, and based on config OS, this property, whether it would be Windows or web. Actually we can also say Linux, add Linux to that, and then we can see that we need to insert another mm, option for matching. So if we do like that, if if in the future we will have to deal with Linux, we will create another class, not web dialog, not Windows dialog, but Linux dialog. But I don't really want to, just to simplify. I just want to simplify things, and yeah. So here you can see this application class, and then I described this application class, and now we can move to the main method where we actually calling this this class to, I mean, constructing the object of this application class, passing in config window. So this is how basically manual dependency injection works. We just can pass parameters or other components into some other components, which is pretty cool. Composition over inheritance and stuff like dependency injection, something like that. But in Scala, we can actually use implicits, but I don't want to use implicits now. I just want my code to be explicit as of now. So we creating this application object, passing in config. Here we actually can change it to Windows or web, right? Like that. And then we call in the app start, and that's basically it. We can actually move this a little bit higher just to make sure we, so yeah, like that. I would structure the code like that, just getting pretty code. This is like ChatGPT generated, but I want to simplify things a bit. So we have this main application which creates object of this class, and this class depends on config case class, which has this property OS, which is of type OS. We can move it maybe even here, because yeah, like that. So, and then we have this yeah, and then we have actually another types, or so we have trait button, which is like interface in Java, but in Scala it is trait. So we have define render, which is abstract method. We don't implement anything here, and we have def on click, which is basically function that accepts another function, which is of type I think this is unit, if I'm not mistaken, to unit. So it's just, I mean, not, this is just empty parenthesis block. We don't actually need any parameters passed into this function. It's just like a function that uses some, makes some side effect. All right, so this is not pure function, which can actually go to, for example, network call or database call or something like that. Read file, I don't know, some side effect. And an on-click method also returns unit, so I think it's also like side effect. And render also side effect because it returns unit. These are not pure functions, these are functions to intended to be with side effect, I think. It's just my interpretation from Java perspective, from Kotlin perspective, from Scala perspective, what I saw this terminology. And then we have Windows button, which extends button. In Java, it would be implements because we are implementing like interface. This is trait, but actually we can say that this is in Java would be just interface. So here in Java, it will be implements rather than extends. In Java, we see extends, we can extend, so interface can extend interface, or class can extend another class. But here we have class that extends button trait, so it's a little bit not like in Java. So within Windows button we have render, which is like override overridden or implementation method to this rendering the Windows button. Then we have on click, Windows button click. So here render is just like, it's just side effect of printing something on the console, but in the real application, it can be real rendering Windows button. For example, we have GUI application. Suppose we have IntelliJ IDEA as a GUI application, and this button, for example, we have debug button, we have run button, so on and so forth. We have a lot of buttons, so these are like render. Like we can say that these buttons are rendered where in this render function. We can actually implement this if we are about to implement in real GUI application. And then we have within this Windows button, we have on click, which is, as I said, from interface. This on click implements this trade method. The signature is the same, and here we just saying that whenever a user clicks on this button, on this Windows button, this should this is like event в общем обработчик событий, if we talk in Russian, for example. So here we have print ln Windows button clicked, but actually we can actually go, for example, save some data to the server, or another thing, fetch some data into the server. This is just side effect, and side effect can actually be in this function also passed in. We can do some stuff before, and then call this side effect, and then after it we can actually also code some logic. So it's pretty flexible approach. And then we have HTML button, which extends button traits. So we have Windows button and HTML button, but for HTML we render in HTML button. For HTML button, so you got the idea. And then we have dialog, create button, and render. So we have here a trait dialog, which is abstract thing. We we declare this create button method, but do not implement it. We let other subclasses, web dialog and Windows dialog, to override or implement this, to be specific, implement this dialog. This is like here. This is concrete creators override the factory method to change the resulting products type. Yeah, exactly. So this dialog is, this button is product type in the terminology of factory method design pattern. So button is product, all right? But here, this is implementation of this pattern, so we don't call things like in terminology product. We are calling in specific to our domain. We calling these things in from a perspective of our business domain. So if we can say that. So for Windows dialog, we creating a new Windows button. For web dialog, we create an HTML button. So this is like dialog trait, and here these are implementations of this trait as interfaces. This can be thought of interface in Java. So we have create button, and here we have create button each specific. We can actually add another, like we can actually call like Linux dialog, and then create button. It will be like Linux button, and then we need to implement this, create this class, as well as we did for HTML button, right? But I don't want to, because just we can go with these two implementations. So this is abstract, and then we have, so trait can have abstract methods without implementation, without function body or method body, and then we have render, which is like a function not abstract. It's concrete function that because it has the function body or method body. So we have OK button, variable declare, and create button. Note that we are creating a button, but we don't have implementation. So this render is supposed to be called on when we have actual implementations, when we have actual classes, when we have actual implementations of this create button, because it's nonsense to to call this render on dialog itself. This trait should have its implementations, web dialog or Windows dialog, to be able to properly run this method. Scala and Java guarantees that we need implementations of traits. So in Java, for example, we cannot actually we cannot create an instance of interface, but we can actually create like instance of interface in form of an unnamed object, like an object without explicitly named class. Like we just can, okay, it's not all right. So we have render method, we have OK button, we created a button is, so it's really important that this dialog does not know the actual button to be created. It does not even need to know which buttons we have. Maybe it's Windows dialog or web dialog, maybe some cosmic autonomous button in dialog button, or a Linux button or Android or iOS button. It doesn't really care. It depends on abstractions. This dialog trait depends on button abstraction. So within render we have create OK button, create button, button on click, close dialog. When so basically we are calling this on click. On click method is this one. We are passing to button some function, and on click close dialog. Close dialog is function. We are passing this function into as parameter of this on click method. So what happens is just we say we creating some button. It can be either of Windows or web dialog, or we can extend, as I said, with Linux buttons, but we creating a button and we calling on click close dialog. So on click, what it does is also we have trait button with on click, but button can actually be or HTML or Windows button. So if it is Windows button, we have here on click, it will be printed like Windows button clicked, and then calling the past function. So calling past function, past as a parameter to this method. So we call in this on click, and then we OK button render. OK button render is here, render within the straight button, and then we have render here for Windows. It will be rendering the Windows button. So I think we should actually, what we should now see in the console is that we if it is Windows, then we need to see that we firstly Windows button clicked, then we need to see that dialog closed, and then we need to see, okay, yeah, and render. It's strange, it's really strange, but how it is rendered in HTML. So we can see this. I attach this as a code into underneath of this video, so you can refer to this, and I just hit the build and run button to see what we have. So as I said, we have Windows button clicked, dialog closed, and then rendering a Windows button, but it's really strange. Let's actually firstly render a Windows button. All right, so for that we need to change the order of execution. So now this rendering the Windows button should be at the very beginning, and then Windows button clicked and dialog closed. So let's see. Yeah, rendering the Windows button, Windows button clicked and dialog closed. And then if we want to switch to the other platform, for example, we need to switch to web, we just need to just change the config. So for example, it emulates that we actually received a config, and somebody can actually change the variable within the config, and we can actually not changing our application. The code will be the same, but now for web we should see how. So we should see rendering an HTML button clicked, and then we need to see the same for all implementations, dialog closed. So dialog closed should be the same, but here we don't need to see Windows, and yeah, and here we should actually see instead web. So let's rerun this application and see, and actually, yeah, rendering HTML button click, dialog close. So it's really powerful pattern, which so we can actually so it's really flexible pattern, because we don't need to change. For example, this dialog class can be unchanged. We can actually do like that. We can create another web dialog. We can say it will be Linux dialog extends dialog, and then create button. We should say we need to return Linux button, for example, and move it like that, because I want to. So why I moved, because we have here Windows and Linux. These are platforms, and this is just web. This is like for browser. It runs on Windows and Linux. So I think it's proper to do like that. And then we just need to create another button, which can be placed like here. I do like that. I do like that. I do like that, which extend, yeah. And here I just say that we are now rendering a Linux button and Linux button clicked. So these are the only changes that I need to make in order to add no, I need to also specify that for OS we can actually have, it's not proper to have it like OS. I would say that this is platform, right? So we change it to platform type. So for platform, yeah, so it's the only change. I rename. So Scala is really flexible. I don't need to specify this platform. So the changes that I changed from OS to platform. So I really love Scala. I'm new to Scala. I have some experience, a lot of experience, not a lot of, but maybe 3 years of Java and Kotlin development, but Scala is like a charm. So for OS, we can actually have Linux. What if I choose to, for example, we have now config passed as Linux. It says that for config, it says it. So we don't, okay, we actually need to specify platform new, all right, because yeah, for config OS platform, it's my fault for platform, and then we need this Scala or compiler already knows that we extended this type, so we need to handle mm, additional case in order to this pattern matching to be exhaustive. This is the proper name for it. So for this we can actually say new, not web dialog, but not web dialog. Where is one? Okay, we can actually say that we have Linux dialog, and I move it to here to make these dialogues in the same place. And for Linux dialog, we already have this Linux dialog, and that's the only changes that we need. So we changed. So if we need to accommodate new dialogues or platforms, we need to change. Firstly, we need to change this. Not firstly, but let's count how many changes we need. We need to change this to accommodate new pattern for case for pattern matching. We should specify new platform here. We should create new. So this is unchanged. Windows button unchanged. We only need to create a new class. This class unchanged, and this class also unchanged, and just we added a new class. So we extended the functionality of our application by adding new classes and a little bit changing existing classes to accommodate this pattern matching. Also, we have changed this. So let's actually see how it behaves. I think it's okay. Yeah, rendering a Linux button clicked dialog close. So it's really powerful pattern, which, to be honest, I didn't even use in my production journey so far. Yeah. So I don't believe that. Yeah, we can actually omit this new